everybody, and welcome back to an Invisible and Invisible Illness Awareness Project. So the last couple weeks I've been talking about some of the elimination diets that I've been on. This week I wanted to just focus in on one particular thing, which is gluten. A lot of people seem to be under the impression that if you don't have celiac disease, you have no reason to avoid gluten, and that everybody else is just doing it because it's a trend. That is definitely not true. Because of my EOE, I've had a lot of endoscopies done, and they always take biopsies, and they'll test, and they'll say over and over again that I do not have celiac disease. However, I definitely do not tolerate gluten. You'll know from my other videos that I did eat gluten all of my life. I never noticed that I had a problem with it. A couple years before I had to really cut down my diet, I actually went grain-free for several months. When I first started back, I was just eating rice and then spelt, which contains less gluten than wheat, and then eventually I did go back to wheat, and I never really noticed an issue with it, which is probably the response a lot of people would have if they're healthy and they cut gluten out. They could go back to eating it and it wouldn't really make much of a difference. However, when my health declined, it definitely did make a difference. Within the first few months, I would get a box of like chocolate chip cookies every Saturday, because then I would just have time to be out of it and deal with the consequences of cheating. So I already knew at that point that when I did have these cookies on the weekend, I was gonna get a migraine, maybe some stomach pains. It wasn't pleasant. It wasn't something I wanted to deal with on a daily basis, but it was something I could put up with in order to soothe those cravings. Once I finally started cutting my diet down with all of my elimination lists, I was still eating gluten, and I didn't see as much improvement as I wanted. So then the next step for me was to cut that out. And I could tell pretty early on, like within the first few months, that every weekend when I would let myself cheat and indulge in a box of cookies, I would get migraines. So I was noticing an effect. It was something I could deal with, but it was enough that I wouldn't want to deal with it on a daily basis, and it did leave me more fatigued than usual. Eventually I noticed that I would also get an upset stomach too, as I sort of cheated less and less often, and I got used to being on this diet. Then there was a point several months later where I was out one day, I ate a croissant, and I felt like I was fine, so I thought, well, let me go ahead and get another croissant the next day. And then I noticed that I was choking on my food, so I could tell that the wheat or the gluten had led to the inflammation of my esophagus resurfacing and was causing me issues. So I stayed away from it, because obviously I didn't want to choke and end up with another impaction. About another 6 months later, after not having any gluten at all, found myself at home on a Sunday. Everything was closed. I had nothing to eat, and there was a Pizza Hut just next door. So I thought, I haven't cheated in a while. Why don't I go ahead and indulge? I ordered myself a pizza and garlic bread. When it arrived, I was starving, and I ate it all, pretty much all at once. Stuffed myself. And I thought, you know, I'll deal with a migraine, stomach pains, being in horrible pain and not able to get out of bed tomorrow, more intensified fatigue than usual, which is really saying something considering I was barely even getting out of bed at all at the time. But I thought, you know what, I can tough it out, I'll survive, and I get to indulge this once. What I wasn't expecting was just a few hours later, I started itching around my armpits, and that continued for the next couple months, and I would scratch myself raw. It was horrible. I was calling it my dragon scale. It was not pretty. Fortunately, it migrated, so that when the skin got too raw to itch, I'm absolutely convinced that the only reason it stopped was because I started LDN at that point. I went to so many specialists. I tried steroids and antihistamines, which were really the only thing they could recommend. Even the IV antihistamines barely made a dent in it. There was really nothing anybody could do, and it seemed like nobody really cared. They would just kind of shrug their shoulders, send me on my way, and leave me to suffer. So obviously that kept me off gluten for a while. Eventually I did kind of mess with it a little bit, and I'm to the point now where sometimes I'll chance it, and occasionally I might get away with it and not really notice anything, but typically I will notice that my throat gets a little bit tighter when I try to swallow, and I'll get a migraine and upset stomach, and I really don't want to push it too much, so I definitely don't go overboard like I did that time. Yeah, just because somebody doesn't have celiac does not mean that they don't have an issue with gluten. There are so many illnesses where you have to restrict gluten because gluten or wheat just it creates a lot of excess inflammation in the body, which a healthy person can handle, but someone with an illness that's tied to or aggravated by inflammation is going to be very sensitive to something like that. There are a lot of illnesses out there where you wouldn't see the connection, but if that illness is somehow affected by inflammation in the body, then removing gluten can improve that condition. So if you've never considered removing gluten, maybe that's one more thing to think about. If you have removed gluten from your diet, let us know how it impacted you. Did it not make a difference? Did it completely turn your life around? What other symptoms or conditions did removing gluten improve for you? If you like this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. If you haven't yet subscribed, do that too. If you'd like to help contribute to subtitles, especially translations for our non-native or deaf or hard of hearing viewers, definitely check out the link for that. If you'd like to contribute to supporting this channel, you can become a patron on Patreon. If you'd like to support me directly, you can donate to my GoFundMe. And don't forget, we've now got chronic illness awareness t-shirts in the Teespring shop, so make sure to check those out too. And you can find all of the links in the description below. And I will see you guys next week.